We've all been there. There you are. You're scrolling YouTube. You're looking for something novel. Then suddenly you stumble across it. Open your third eye. Get enlightened in 6.9 seconds. Manifest anything now. And of course, you think to yourself, what? This can't be real. This is ridiculous. But what if? What if this is the thing? I mean, I do have that student loan debt. I do have that credit card debt. I could be doing better. So what's it gonna hurt? Let's try it. Next thing you know, you're tapping your forehead. You're going upside down for some reason. You're paying your last $333 for some course, and then boom, you transcend. It happens. You get enlightened. You merge with the non-dual mystery at the root of reality. You become one with the great mysterium tremendum. And despite the fact that we know on some level that this will never happen, we will never get enlightened instantly through doing some weird technique, we get pulled in. I mean, look at the view counts on some of these videos. But how? Why do we get pulled into it? Why do we pin our hopes on dubious spiritual influencers, making ridiculous promises like instant wealth and enlightenment, happiness, love, whatever? And by the way, I'm not saying I'm above this. I've been pulled into this kind of stuff more times than I'd care to admit. And that's why I'm making this video, actually, because I've consumed so much of this content, because I've been approached by so many people peddling this stuff who want to be on my podcast or whatever. I needed to say something. In particular, I wanted to share a few dirty tricks, red flags that I've seen these predatory spiritual influencers use time and time again. Also, my thoughts have kind of evolved on this. I used to think, who cares what people want to do? Just let them consume whatever they want to consume. They'll figure it out over time themselves. As long as it's not hurting anybody, I don't care. And for the most part, that's still true. But I've come to the realization over time that this kind of content does hurt people. People who are well-meaning, they're looking for answers. They're looking for a path worth following. Maybe they're even suffering. And that's why I think this is vitally important to say. So the first red flag that I've noticed that almost all of these dubious spiritual influencers have in common is that they use spiritual language to encourage fundamentally unspiritual behavior, like manifesting material wealth and all of these other ego-inflating sorts of goals. And you might be thinking,
Michael, who are you to say what's spiritual? Who are you to say what goals are spiritual or not?
Well, I totally agree with you on that point. So let's look to the world's spiritual traditions to highlight what I mean. So yeah, there are many things the world's spiritual traditions do not share in common, but there are a few very important things that they do share in common. Basically, all of them encourage being humble, diminishing the ego, not being a materialistic dick in general. Let's look at the example of Siddhartha Gautama, better known as Buddha. If you're not familiar with his origin story, he was actually born and raised a noble. He never wanted for anything. He was spoiled his entire life. But as he got older, he got more and more curious until one night when he finally escaped the palace for the first time. He finally snuck out and saw the reality of the outside world. And what he saw shocked him. He saw the suffering people were going through for the very first time and realized that he had been living a lie. He had been sort of living in a soft, cushy matrix. And this haunted him. So he decided he needed to leave that life. He needed to abandon his status, his possessions, even his family to pursue spiritual truth. So this is one example. Maybe you're thinking, I don't care about Buddhism. I'm not Buddhist. I'm a Christian. Then let's look to Jesus. He says it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. And although this next example is a little more esoteric, I think it's really important to go over. And that's the Hermetic point of view on this topic of using spiritual language and spiritual techniques to accumulate material success and wealth. And why is that important? It's because a lot of times when there's talk of manifesting wealth and success, it can really be traced back to Hermeticism's mentalism, because that all is mind idea is considered a core tenet of Hermeticism. And if you're not familiar with Hermeticism, just know that it has inspired a lot of the New Age stuff you see out there. It's essentially this Greco-Egyptian mystical tradition that inspired basically all of Western esotericism in general. It's one of the main sources people use to buttress the idea that you can manifest material success with your mind somehow. But again, that's actually antithetical to Hermetic philosophy, to Hermetic principles. In the Corpus Hermeticum, Hermes Trismegistus, who's the titular sage figure at the center of this philosophy, says this to illustrate that point.
Leap clear of all that is corporeal, and make yourself grown to a like expanse with that greatness which is beyond all measure. Rise above all time and become eternal. Then you will apprehend God.
So how can you leap clear of all that is corporeal, of all that is physical, if you're grasping for wealth and materialistic success?
That doesn't make sense.
So this is what I mean when I say these influencers are using spiritual language and spiritual techniques to encourage non-spiritual behavior. It's really antithetical to the principles genuine spirituality is aimed at. And let me be totally clear. I like stuff. I know we all need to make a buck. We all want to get those sweet, sweet doggy coins. But let's not kid ourselves. Let's not conflate the accumulation of worldly wealth with spirituality. The next red flag that basically all toxic spiritual influencers have in common is that they use decontextualized spiritual techniques and language. You'll see this in all of this content. They use spiritual terminology the audience doesn't fully understand to, again, prey on what we all want. We all want wealth, success, happiness, love. Let's take the third eye, for instance, because that's one of the most dubiously wielded topics on the internet.
Ignore the name of my channel.
So first of all, what is the third eye? Though sometimes it is equated with Egyptian lore and the pineal gland, typically it hinges on the yogic tradition where it's known as the Ajna chakra, an energy center located in the brow area that's seen as the link to the subconscious mind, which ultimately leads to communion with Brahman, or absolute reality, a sort of non-dual, direct mystery experience that yogis call samadhi. So you can see how the third eye would potentially be associated with spiritual powers, right? And yes, in a lot of the content that I'm referring to, you will get a similar summary to what I just laid out. But here's what you won't get: the full truth, the full context of how you would even go about accessing, opening, having a third eye-like experience. And the reason for that is simple. It would require a huge overhaul of your lifestyle, a real deep dedication to a spiritual path. Real yogis follow a principle called the eight-limbed path of yoga, which again, you can probably guess what some of these core tenets of that path are. Not doing harm, not grasping, not hoarding, along with diligently meditating and practicing yoga. But who wants to do that? Let's just skip right to the sexy, right to the mind magic. So that's exactly what these toxic influencers do. So watch out for that. Watch out for these decontextualized pieces of terminology and random techniques. The final red flag I want to talk about, which is probably the most important one because it's going to leave you with something actionable, is that these toxic spiritual influencers actively take advantage of human psychology to elevate themselves at your expense. Everyone online who's making something wants your attention, perhaps your money, and there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. But the more important question is, how are they doing it? Are they being honest? Are they being upfront? Are they showing their work? Are they portraying themselves as enlightened or as a fallible, vulnerable human being? Does what they're offering sound too good to be true? Are they actually at least entertaining you? Are they delivering on their promises? These are important questions and absolute red flags to keep on the tip of your brain at all times when you're consuming this content. And that's what I really wanted to leave you with, is this disposition of critical thinking, because that's how you really empower yourself. That's how you really get closer to truth and accumulate wisdom. And unfortunately, this extends way beyond these influencers I'm talking about. We should be asking ourselves these questions every time we consume any content from any source. Every time we're watching the news, of course, every time we hear a politician speak, but also when those talking heads we like come on the screen, we should question them too, because that's what a rigorous thinker does. That's what critical thinking is. And again, I still get pulled into things. I still get riled up and excited by dubious content all the time. Making sense of the world is not an easy thing. Leaving with clear answers almost never happens.
I find that life is mostly gray areas, especially the parts I can't reach with moisturizer.
And I also want to make clear, maybe I should have said this earlier, I'm not poo-pooing spirituality. I think it's an immensely important part of our lives. I think we require spirituality to make sense of the world, to develop our sense of meaning. And these toxic spiritual influencers are not making that any easier. They're not helping us detangle that confusion. I would argue that they're making it worse. I don't want to make this whole video negative, so I'll leave you with a few green flags, a few things you should look for in your spiritual teachers or purveyors of information. Are they vulnerable? Are they quick to tell you they're not enlightened, that they too are still working on themselves? These are green flags. Do they allow you to question them? Do they deal with personal criticism well? Green flags again. Are they humble? Do they show their work, where they came from, where they learned these things they're talking about? Again, green flags. And with that, my friends, though I don't have any clean answers for you, I do actually have over 300 podcasts with people who I think are reaching toward the right things, are earnestly trying to make sense of the world in a productive way. I might have dropped the ball a few times. You be the judge. And I'm sure you are immensely tired of being bombarded with requests to tickle the algorithm with likes and subs, but that is the currency here on YouTube. That's it for this one. Much love to you, and we'll see you in the next one.